Today's lecture is regarding service objects. And before we get started, a service object is essentially the way that we take all the code that used to live inside the controller and put inside of a separate class called a service object. And the best way to illustrate this is thinking about a small business. Let's take Code Platoon, for example. Now everyone knows Code Platoon behind the scenes is Rod. So Rod, at the very beginning, when Code Platoon was first formed, did everything. He did the books. Let's pretend he did the teaching. He registered the company in the Illinois Board of Higher Education. He was applying for the VA. He was taking care of payroll. He was taking care of leases. He was taking care of getting students and talking with people and setting up emails and things of that nature. He was doing all the marketing. You can kind of see, like even just like that, right off the bat, it's all on one person. And that's not uncommon for a lot of small businesses. Most people, when you're first starting small businesses, you're in charge of everything for yourself. Now, when you're in charge of everything for yourself, that works for a small amount of time. As things get more complicated, you get more students, you have to delegate tasks to other people. So as of right now, it's the very beginning of Code Platoon, and Rod is in charge of everything. Because Rod's in charge of everything, there's one central point of failure. Rod knows everything about the business, which is great, but it's just him, and it's unsustainable for a long period of time. Just like you can't have one person doing everything forever, you have to delegate out to other people. Similarly, your code has to do the same thing. And as Code Platoon has grown, he said, when I got hired on, he said, "John, I need a lead instructor to take care of the day-to-day. Is that something you can handle?" Sure. So I'm now in charge of all the classroom stuff. I'm in charge of all the students and the attendance and the grades and the assessments and the teaching and the TAs and the mentors. Like, that's all stuff that comes onto my plate. His job now is he no longer has to worry about the day-to-day and the instruction. He just needs to worry about other things like business and getting leads and other companies and things of that nature. As we've gotten approved for the GI Bill, a lot of marketing efforts needed to come into play. Before, it was just Rod and me, and now we have a whole other team that takes care of that kind of stuff. So you can kind of see, like, instead of having one central point of failure, instead of having one central point where like everything could possibly blow up, you're going to delegate that task out to other people. And just like a small business owner who does 1,000 things all at one time, there's only a certain amount of time that they can do that before they just blow up. And similarly, there's a certain amount of time that your controller can take care of code before it just gets too much for any person to read. So as of yesterday, as of so far, we've been adding very basic complexity to our controller actions. We've just been able to do CRUD so far, and that's more or less all that we really needed to do. That's the easy part, though. That's the bad part about learning all of this, is like CRUD is difficult, nested CRUD is even more difficult, and that's just the baseline of things. We keep practicing it over and over because it's extremely important. As things get more and more complicated, we can think of something like an Amazon. Amazon, when you press the create order, like the place order, that giant yellow button on the right hand side of the page, when you click that, there's a lot of other things that happen in the background. They have to create the order itself. They have to update the database. They have to email you a confirmation. They have to probably send something to accounting. They probably have to send something to the shipping department. They have to update FedEx. FedEx has to update them. There's a lot of things that are happening underneath the hood. And that's just like one small example when it comes to FedEx. Other things could be like might need to refresh stored statistics if you're updating some data. Maybe you need to call out to third-party APIs to retrieve data or do validations for like credit cards. You might need to call third-party services to persist data, like charging a credit card. You need to do a lot of things. And the issue with that is right now we only have one place to set it up because we're following the MVC framework, Model View Controller. Again, the model stands for the thing that connects from your Ruby. The model is everything found under the models folder. It's the thing that connects mostly to your database. The view is what gets shown off to the user, and the controller is all the logic that drives the view. So it talks between the database and the views. So where does this business logic happen? When I create an order on Amazon, what should take care of, what should take care of all of the emails being sent, the credit cards being charged, the shipping department being updated, the accounting team? Like, what happens at that particular point? You could put in the models, but then you have what's called fat models, like really fat models. All the stuff happens inside the models, and skinny controllers. And that's really bad because your model, let's say it's an order, it would create an order, it would send an email, which means it needs to know about the email class. It needs to update your accounting division, which means it knows about the accounting division. It needs to update the shipping department, which means it knows about the shipping department. And you, at that particular point, you're saying the one model called orders knows everything about everything else. That's a bad place to be because that entangles our code. It's called coupling. It leads to code that's very, very difficult and hard to maintain. There's one central point of failure, and that's going to be your models. But if I flip it around, then I have skinny models and fat controllers. When I have skinny models, the models just take care of CRUDing in the database, and then we have fat controllers. The controllers will do everything. Like, it needs to know about everything. And just like having one person in a small business do every aspect of the business, you can't have a controller that does absolutely everything. So because it doesn't fit into the M and it doesn't fit into the C, the model and the controller, we have to figure out something else. And that's where we're going to start today, is talking about something called service objects. So I've downloaded something called Catalog Business. I'm going to check out a new branch. Check out -B, John's branch echo. And I've opened it in Sublime here. Now let's kind of take a look at this before we get started. So it's a business catalog. I think we did this very, very early on when we were doing nested CRUD. Now we've made a few updates, so we'll start off with the database and take a look at what we've got. So we have users. Most apps need users to get started. Each user has an email, name, and password. The password digest here is basically the encrypted password. It's kind of like when I eat an apple and I digest it, it looks different from when it first came in. So the password digest saved in the database looks different from the actual password that you originally started with. Then I have manufacturers. Manufacturers have a name and description, and that's about it. Looks like a product belongs to a manufacturer, so a manufacturer has many products, and that has a name, price, and SKU number. I'm adding divides to each of one of my users. I'm adding the lockable thing in case they get locked out. And then finally, I'm creating something called events. Now, events is just a table inside the database. Belongs to a user, has an event type, and some details about it. Events is supposed to, for our purposes today, events is supposed to mimic like record keeping. I'm trying to keep things up to date. So what we'll do is I'm going to throw a pry inside of the gem file. I'm going to bundle install, and I'm going to YOLO. YOLO is my alias for drop, create, migrate, and seed all at the same time. Alright, now what we've got here is let's take a look at make sure that all the specs are passing. But we'll run bundle exec rspec and we'll see what we get. Fantastic. So we have every little bit of code has been tested, and we can take a look at what we've got. So my goal for today is to start refactoring some of the code that's out of the very, very fat controllers right now, and instead put them inside of services. Now if you look under here, we have under app we have channels and controllers and models and views, but we have no place for services. So I'm going to right click right here and add a services folder. This one services folder is going to keep track of all of my service objects, things that are business logic oriented. So if you take a look inside of, I think it's a products controller, we have like a default thing built in here on the right hand side. And we're going to jump down. Let's choose destroy to start with. So I'm doing a few things with destroy. I am finding the product, I'm destroying the product, and then I'm creating an event, and then I'm redirecting to the manufacturer path. So I'm doing a lot of things. And this particular products controller is in charge of destroying products, which is correct, but it's also in charge of creating an event, and that's probably a little outside of its scope. So instead of saying I have one, like when I do destroy, I'm going to go through all of these steps, I'm just going to pass it off to somebody else. And with that, let's jump over here into services. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to split the screen into two. I'm going to create something called destroy product.rb. Now, take a look at the name that I have here. The name for our service is very verby. And the reason that's verby is once I read into destroy product, I know exactly what the class is going to do. This class is going to destroy the product. That's about it. And it's going to take, I'm going to take a bunch of the code from here and more or less dump it inside of here. The class itself is pretty simple. Initialize and call. There might be other methods that you need, but the two ones that you definitely need are initialize and call. The initialize is for all the data that for you to accept all the data that you need in order to execute this particular line of code. And the call is actually the action of what's happening. So it looks like I need a few things. It looks like I need a current user to do this. I need a ID of the product. And I also need the manufacturer. So why don't I bring all of that stuff inside of here? So I've made everything readers, so I have access to it everywhere else. And what I've got here is saying I'm going to call destroy product with I need a current user, which is right here. I need a product ID, which is this params ID, and I also need this manufacturer. Those are the three things I need to execute all of this code, and instead I'm putting in this class over here. And all I need to really do is I can just do the main thing of the main meat of what's happening here is I'm going to destroy the product, and then I'm going to create the event. And all I'm doing is I'm just grabbing the stuff from here and dumping it in its place here. And if this seems like very simple, like I'm just moving code from one end to another, it's because it is. My call method very clearly reveals what it means to delete a product. I'm going to destroy the actual product, and I'm going to log the change. One thing to note here inside of this object, this particular class, is that it's not inheriting from anything. If you take a look inside of products controller, I'm inheriting from application controller, which gives me access to the magical params hash. So if you take a look inside of every single action inside of here, and especially the destroy, I have access to this magical params hash. And that's only available within products controller, any controller that inherits from application controller. But what I've got over here on the right side is a plain old Ruby object. It's not inheriting from anything, which means that's not connected to the database. It's not directly connected to the database. On line 12, I'm connecting to the database through another class. But this one stands alone. It doesn't really need anything. So when we create our event, we had to switch from grabbing our IDs from the ID over here. If you take a look, we moved from basically taking the ID from the objects to needing to pass it in over here. Now what we're gonna do next is we're going to change the controller to actually make use of this object over here. Thankfully, modern Rails, we don't need to require relative. It actually automatically loads everything within app services, so we can just substitute all of this code directly into our service object with our service object. So I'm going to replace all of this code. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code to just 3 very simple lines. First, I'm going to create a service. I'm creating a local variable called service, which is equal to destroy product.new with all of these different things, and then I'm going to call. That's about it. And after I call it, I'm going to redirect them. So let's see. I have enough tests that test every single bit of code, and let's see if all the tests still pass before we move anything. Alright, and everything still works. Of course, our intent's not to leave the tests alone, but we're going to try to simplify them. So here I have the products controller spec. I have all these specs over here, and over here I need to start moving some of these specs from the products controller into this destroy product spec. So let's find the destroy somewhere on here. Oh, there it is. So under here we have a few things. We're going to create a product. We're going to we're testing that it deletes the selected product. It redirects to the whole list page, and it adds an event. Those are the three things, and of course it includes some event details when we log those events. So we want to move all of this code from where it is right now into a separate spec file for destroy product. We want to simplify the tests that we have. Now let's take a look. It takes 7.98 seconds to load, and we're going to see how much faster it's going to be when we move things from the controller into the service object. So under spec, I'm going to create a new folder called services. And remember, every piece of code that you write, you also have to test. I'm going to call this destroy product spec.rb. Throw it over here. And I'm just going to write this thing. I'm grabbing this from your curriculum. Essentially, I'm going to test everything one bit at a time. So number one, it destroys the selected product. So I still have my same product. I have a manufacturer, I have a user, and I'm creating a service that's going to, and the rest of this here, I'm just copying directly from there to here. So let's run the tests and see what we get. Alright, so everything blows up. First things first, this is not supposed to be params equals. It's supposed to be params equals instead of the colon. Alright, so this says it blows up. It says that there's an undefined method delete. So let's jump back over to our specs over here and take a look at what we've got. So it looks like when we directly copy and paste the code from here to here, the ability to use this delete method is only because this is a controller spec. This is not a controller spec. This is just a plain old Ruby object. This is a service object spec. So I don't have access to this delete method because that's something that's built into my controllers. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this whole thing. And I'm still testing the same thing, but I'm going to add these two lines. So I'm going to create a service called destroy product.new with all of the things that I've created up here. And then when I run call on it, I expect it to actually delete one of the products. So it should decrease the count by -1. So let's run the test one more time and see what we get. Now it's still running. And go. And you can kind of see everything still passes. So I'm going to start translating the rest of this code over from here and throw it inside of here instead. So this redirects will stay here, and I'm going to remove this code completely, and I'm going to throw it in its place right over here. So when I run the call method of the destroy product, it destroys the product. It adds an event, which I'm going to need to probably get rid of all this again. What happened? Let me grab this. Service. Oh, it's because it's super tiny. Expect service.call to I'm going to add an event record. So I'm going to change this from the products count to the event.count by 1. And then finally, I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to grab this. I'm going to do service, and I'm going to call the service, and I'm going to grab the last event. I expect the last event that I created to have all of this information inside of it. So let's see if this works. So I've deleted some code from over here. all of the duplicated tests are now gone. They're inside of here instead. And we're just going to run the tests. Hopefully this will be faster because I think controller tests are slower than plain old Ruby objects. So let's find out. Bundle exec rspec. Alright, so it took a little bit longer. Let's run it one more time. Maybe it's a little bit faster this particular time. But you can kind of see, instead of duplicating the test and keeping everything inside the controller, I'm moving things over here to the service object. Right now, if you take a look here, we're actually searching right over here on this last event. We're actually searching the entire database for the last event created. In this case, we're probably pretty safe for checking that one event, but it won't always be true. Because you can kind of imagine, as your app is going to grow, you're going to have more people hitting your particular service, so you will never actually know whether or not this particular event is the correct one. So if that event fails to save for some reason, we're going to get a no method error. If we create multiple events or create them in different order, it's going to get more and more difficult to find the right object. So instead, I'm going to have the service object expose some result data after we invoke call. So what I'm going to do is I have this, excuse me, I'm going to have a product.destroy, and I'm going to create an instance variable called @event equals event.create. I'm going to add that up here to the adder readers so that I can access this particular destroy products event outside of the class. So I'm going to, instead of having this super brittle test right here, I'm going to get rid of this. And instead, instead of doing event dot, I'm going to do, I will have service dot event. So I have each individual service has an event attached to it, rather than grabbing the last one inside of the database. Let's go here. All right, and we can see everything is running as we expect. Let's run it one more time. All right, so you can kind of see everything is still passing. Now, we verified this service works with its own tests. You know, it destroys the product, adds an event, and has some details when we log. But we're not really testing that anything is being executed directly in the product controller. We removed a bunch of code, but we're not really doing much over here. So here's what a usual test what we would want to do. So if you look under the destroy under the product controller, we have a destroy product. We're just calling destroy product, and we're testing it over here. All I really need to test on this side is that it invokes the destroy product service, because we're already testing that over here. We can rely on the tests here on the right side to test that it actually works. We want to see that this particular thing is going to actually call the destroy product service successfully. So in our test, instead of checking for the result of the service, we're simply checking whether or not the service was actually used and the arguments that we passed in were correct. It's not a perfect test, but it's much faster than what we had before, and we'll see that it gives us a little bit of flexibility. Before we continue on, let's go down one final rabbit hole. So our service is a little strange. You can see I'm passing in a product ID, but then I'm passing in an entire manufacturer object. And that happened because if you take a look inside the product controller, we have a before action called find manufacturer. This one's looking for an ID, and we get an entire object. This one passes the entire object. We want to have similar kinds of data. So if I'm passing in IDs, I want all the things I'm passing in to be IDs. If I'm passing in all objects, let's just do all objects to do that. So let's change this to manufacturer ID. Let's run this test. And while we're waiting for that, let's refactor this particular bit of code here at the bottom with destroy. So I was passing in an entire manufacturer before, but if you take a look under find manufacturer, I have access to something, this magic called params manufacturer ID. So I'm going to pass in not the entire object, but instead I'm going to just pass in the manufacturer ID. We're going to run it one more time and see what we get. So we're going to run bundle exec rspec and see that everything is going to pass, hopefully. Alright, so we got a whole bunch of things that got blown up. Alright, we have expected destroy product to receive new with user, product ID, and manufacturer. Okay, so it looks like the test is saying that we're passing in the entire manufacturer object, but instead we actually need to pass in the string ID. So let's jump back over here. I expect this to be user manufacturer.id.2s. Let's see if this passes now. Alright, everything is working again. And one final thing to fix up. So before, if you see here, we are calling a service, and no matter what, we're redirecting them to a manufacturer path. But what if you can't find the manufacturer? What if something blows up? Where would this particular how would we test this? So we have a test that's written here in your curriculum. I'm just going to dump it at the bottom here. But so it renders a 404 page if the record isn't found. This probably needs to happen inside the products controller spec, because basically you have to go, what happens if something blows up? So we can either put this inside the products controller or we can put it inside the service object. Let's take a look. I think this is okay. I think we can put this inside of here. So it invokes the destroy product, it redirects, and then it also will, oh, what happened? There it is. It also renders a 404 page if one of the records is not found. So on our end here, what happens if I can't find a manufacturer? What happens if I can't find a product? Let's first create the test to account for that. So I have a test that says it sets an error when the manufacturer or the product can't be found. So I'm going to have a service, and I'm going to have a -1 right over here for the product ID. Like obviously there's no product with a negative ID number, so I'm going to have something blow up. So let's take a look. Alright, so if we run this test right now, I'm pretty sure we're going to get some sort of error. Boom. Alright, so it blows up. It says active record, record not found. So because we couldn't find a product with an ID of -1. So this test assumes two patterns that we haven't seen yet. One, the service should return a success or not success, which is that thing right here on line 30, to signal whether or not it succeeded. And it should keep track of its own errors. So here's a basic implementation of how do we handle error cases. So I'm going to copy this over from the curriculum and just paste it over here. Okay. Alright, so everything remains the same. I have a current user, I have a manufacturer, I have a product, and I have this weird looking thing right over here, this rescue active record not found. So basically what's happening is on line 6, it's looking for a manufacturer. If it cannot find a manufacturer, it blows up. It says right here, there's an error. It says active record, record not found. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rescue that particular error, meaning that if this particular error shows up, I'm going to rescue it. And what I'm going to set instead is say, I'm going to set a instance variable of error to not found. When I call it, if there's an error present, like if this is equal to something, then I'm going to return. I'm just going to stop at that particular point. So this basically solves the issue of what if I pass in a manufacturer that does not exist. In addition, I probably need to set up another method called success. I'm basically going to say error.present equals false. So I know that, so destroy product can tell me if it's successful based on the fact that if there is no error present. So I can do it like this, or I can also write it like this. It's up to you which one you prefer. So this bang means not, so it negates whatever comes next. So I'm negating the fact that the error is present. So error present equals false, bang error present, they're identical, choose which one works for you. So what I'm going to do here at this particular point is I have this service. I'm going to call it. And I have a whole bunch of things I can do at this particular point. So again, I started off as a product controller that did everything. Literally everything could have happened in this particular point. And I've delegated all of that off to this destroy product on the right. If the service is successful, right over here, if it's true, then I'm going to redirect them to the manufacturer path saying that your thing was successfully destroyed. Else if I have an error and it says not found, this thing right here, I'm going to render a page that says errors not found, and the status is going to be not found. If you look under the errors view page, let's take a look. And jump under views, we have errors and not found. It just says not found. This is the page that we load when you couldn't find it. Alright, so if it's successful, we redirect it. If there's an error, then that says not found, we'll render the not found page. Otherwise, we're just going to say something happened, sucks. Redirect them to the manufacturer path, and just say an error occurred and we couldn't destroy that particular product. So this is like a really typical looking controller action when we're doing service objects here on the right. The controller has two real responsibilities. One is to invoke the correct business logic by calling the appropriate service, which is this destroy product here. And based off of that result, it just tells you what to route. Again, it's like, I'm going to do something, I'm going to pass that off to somebody else. Based on their response, then I can tell you what's going to happen. So it's kind of like, I was watching this very cool documentary about like the largest hotels in the world. Now these largest hotels in the world, like they have lots of towels at their pools. Now they oftentimes don't have the ability to wash their own towels. So what they'll do is they'll take all the dirty towels and then they'll give it off to somebody else. And then they don't have to worry about the washing and pressing of their own laundry of their own towels. They get that laundry back on a regular schedule. So instead of like that particular hotel taking care of thousands and thousands of hotel towels, they ship it off to somebody whose job is just to wash towels. Based off of that, like they're able to do the rest of their logic unimpeded and don't have to wait. So again, just to recap, a service object is basically the ability to take a lot of code that exists inside the controller and put it in a separate file called a service object. The service object is written as a verb, very verby, like destroy product. So when I read it, I know exactly what it is. It's a plain old Ruby object, which means that it's not inheriting from anything. And it takes in mostly two methods. One is initialize, what do you need in order to get started? And then call, which is what's actually being executed. You can kind of see this in action in an old student's project. So Darnell Gilead is one of our students from Charlie Platoon, and he utilized it in a project he called Read Together Rails. And it's up here at togetherweread.herokuapp.com. Now this app is essentially a CRUD app that reads out to the Goodreads API. It's a book discussion, like an online book discussion, book club. So I'm signed in, you can see all the discussions. So these are all of the book discussions that they have. Maybe I want to read about The Great Escape by Paul Brickhill. You can kind of see /book discussion /15, and you can see all of the stuff that's happening. Like he used the discuss API just to get this general discussion to come inside of here. And he has a great example of using this. So let's jump over to controllers, and we have book discussions. Now if you look under book discussions, most of this looks the same. We have index, we have all, We have save, remove save, but the main thing I want to point out is this search. So inside of a book discussion, you have the ability to search for a book. Maybe I want to look up Harry Potter. Maybe I want to look up Harry Potter and I want to see all the different books that are available. Looks like there are all these different books that you call out to the Goodreads API, and you can create a discussion based off of that. If you take a look over here, there's a service object called find books. Find books looks very service object-y because it's named like a verb. I jump over to services and I look at find books. You can see that I have a new, initialize, and I have a call. All of this code is everything that needs to go underneath the hood in order to do the call. You can probably make these into smaller methods, Darnell, if you're watching this, but that's a story for another time. But you can kind of imagine if I had to copy all of this code inside of here and then just kind of dump it in its place here. I mean, obviously, it doesn't look correct because all the indentation's wrong. But you can kind of see there's a lot of extra code that I would need to add in order to get this to work. And when we talk about just book discussions, I just want to see book discussion code. I don't want to see all this extra code to reach out to make a GET request to the Goodreads key and like with the query and everything like that. That's just too much stuff. So instead of having all the code exist in this particular controller file, he separated it into this find books right over here. And that's a little bit about what service objects are.